Welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new here, I am a published health researcher specializing in muscle health, and we've got a pretty interesting paper to cover today, which is going to hopefully answer the question about dirty bulking. Should you be dirty bulking? How many calories should you be consuming to optimize your muscle growth? So this is going to be quite an interesting one, and I've got some pretty important take-home points at the end that will hopefully help to answer that question. Now, this was a study by Eric Helms in 2013. Eric Helms and his colleagues, and they basically wanted to see the amount of calories that you could consume to get the best trade-off between muscle gain and fat loss. But they were asking participants to train over a course of 8 weeks. It was a really well-designed resistance training program. It was mostly compound movements. They did quite a lot of bicep work in there as well. They were doing 8 to 15 repetitions per set. They were training close to failure. Everything was done really well. But the only difference was that they split these participants up into consuming a high calorie diet, a moderate calorie diet, or a maintenance calorie diet. Now, looking at what the groups actually consumed during the study, we saw that the high calorie group, they were aiming for around a 15% surplus on top of their maintenance calories. So they consumed 3,300 calories during the study period. Moderate calorie group ended up consuming 2,600 calories, and the maintenance group ended up consuming 2,500 calories. The researchers measured their muscle thickness at the start and at the end, and they did that by ultrasound. If you've watched our last video, you'll see why they sometimes use ultrasound in research studies instead of maybe some other measures. So ultrasound, they were measuring the biceps, the triceps, and they were measuring lots of muscles in the legs as well to see how that improved. It was a full body program, so you might expect some muscle gain during the period of this program across all groups. You'd be wrong in thinking that, because actually, interestingly, over the 8 weeks, they didn't gain any muscle. They didn't gain any muscle thickness, at least in all muscles apart from the biceps. As you would expect, right over the course of 8 weeks, this is a really well-designed program. They were training close to failure. They were progressing. Yes, they were only training 3 times a week, but still, you might expect some muscle growth. I will preface this by saying these were all resistance-trained people before they came into this study. So in order to be part of this study, you actually had to have been training for a year, at least 3 times a week. You had to have, interestingly, been able to bench your own body weight. So they actually had strength thresholds for you to be in this study, and squat at least 1.5 times your own body weight. So these people weren't just amateurs. These weren't people who had just, picked up a weight for the first time, where in those people we might expect to see more muscle growth. These people were used to training. So it might just be that actually the volume that they were getting in this program, 8 weeks just wasn't enough to see any results. So we'll take that with a pinch of salt, but interesting nonetheless. We only saw that bicep growth improved, and that was mostly in the high calorie group. So what that tells me is when you're training intensely enough, you're training with enough stimulation, which is what they did with the biceps. They did a lot of bicep work, as you'll see on the screen now with the program they followed. When you're training with enough intensity, a higher calorie surplus might actually be beneficial to gaining more muscle. We saw a strength improvement across all groups. So in the squat and the bench 1 rep max, which I believe is how they tested strength in this, we saw an improvement. So squat strength improved by 10 kilograms, but was similar across pretty much all of the groups. Bench press increased slightly more in the higher calorie group, but again, all of the groups experienced a kind of a benefit there in terms of strength. So that brings me to my take-home points for this study and what I think you should be taking home when thinking about, should I dirty bulk? Should I be bulking with a lot of calories in my diet versus just a very small surplus? Strength seems to improve regardless of your calorie surplus, and consuming more calories doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see a greater increase in strength, especially over a short term of kind of 8 weeks or something like that. But when it comes to building muscle, by consuming more calories, you might give your body more of an ability to gain muscle. And I'll kind of illustrate what I mean there. So let's say by training hard, ballpark 20% of the weight that you gain is going to turn into muscle. That's if you're training. If you're not training at all and you gain weight, that might be more like 5-10% of the weight that you gain is muscle. So let's say 20%. If you are, let's say we've got person A who is gaining 10 kilograms in a year versus person B who's gaining 5 kilograms in a year. This is body weight, right? So obviously the person gaining 10 kilograms, they're going to be consuming more calories to get there. So that could be considered the dirty bulking person. Person B who's gaining 5 kilograms of weight, let's say they're doing it in a quite a clean, natural way. Well, if we're working on that 20% rule, the person who is gaining 10 kilograms of weight, of that 10 kilograms, about 2 kilograms of it in a year is going to be muscle, right? Because it's 20% of the 10 kilograms, that's 2 kilograms. The person who only gained the 5 kilograms of muscle, they will only gain 1 kilogram of muscle. Right, so we've got 2 kilograms of muscle versus 1 kilogram of muscle, working on the same 20% rule in terms of 20% of the weight you gain being muscle, the rest being fat. It is more complicated than that, but it gives you an idea to say, well, by consuming more calories, being in a larger calorie surplus, you're giving your body more scope to gain muscle. And you're making it easier for your body, right? So although, yes, there is a ceiling to it, you're not going to be gaining, if you gain 100 kilograms in a year, 20 kilograms of that is not going to be muscle because you can only build muscle at a certain rate. But I think, broadly speaking, the person who gains 10 kilograms is going to build more muscle because they've given their body the raw materials that it needs to build that muscle. And if they're training intensely enough, the body will use those calories to fuel the growth of new muscle tissue. But is the fat gain worth it? Now, my answer to that is, if you're on the skinnier side, like I was a while ago when I was trying to gain weight for the first time, ultimately you probably want to be gaining fat as well as muscle. It's not just lean muscle tissue that you want, because that is very slow to grow and it's not going to give you the look that you're probably trying to achieve. If you're trying to fill out your t-shirts, if you're trying to just generally look bigger with a jumper on or whatever it is, you're probably going to want fat tissue as well as lean muscle tissue. So where do we land on that? What's the ultimate calorie surplus? I think a lot of you might be watching this video to get this answer. And in a couple of other studies, review studies that have looked at these, lots of these studies, I've only obviously covered one today, they've determined that ultimately around 500 calories seems to be, at the moment, the ideal surplus amount. Now, I would say that 500 calories is not the same for everyone. Like I said, if you are on the skinnier side and you need to gain fat as well as muscle, and you want to maximize your muscle growth as much as possible, that can be more like 500 to 1,000 calories. You can have a quicker rate of weight gain, especially if you want to stop looking skinny quicker. If you want to build muscle quicker and build fat quicker, go above that 500 calories, that's absolutely fine. If you're conscious though of how much fat you're going to gain, you'd be aiming more for that 500 calorie mark, and that's the ultimate kind of take-home point that I would say from this. So hopefully you've enjoyed that video, guys. I kept this one a little shorter than the last one, and let me know if there's any topics you want me to cover. I've got a couple lined up, some important points that I think need answering. But yeah, thanks for watching.